I would like to talk about the server environment that you will need to set up in order to learn PHP. I would also like to draw your attention to my icons up here, my logos. Obviously, this is the PHP logo, and we have the MySQL, which we will be learning. The PHP MyAdmin is for the MySQL database. That is where you will be administering and setting up your database. These three programs come with the XAMPP application. So because PHP is a server-sided language, the code must be executed on a web server. You will access the files by typing in either localhost or what is commonly called the loopback address 127.0.0.1 in the browser. When you install XAMPP, you are installing the Apache web server, which traditionally runs on Unix or Linux. However, it can run on your computer also, regardless. Another popular server environment is Internet Information Server, which runs on a Windows platform. Actually, if you wanted to install IIS, you could learn PHP on that environment. And there are a few others out there on the internet. Apache obviously is the most common for our purposes. You cannot just click on a file in a folder like you would for an HTML file. Although it might load, the code will not be executed. So you will need to visit this URL and download the XAMPP environment for your operating system. There is a lot of additional information, videos, and documentation available for you at this website also and on the web. So when you set it up, you will see the wizard and pretty much just follow the defaults. It will ask you if you want to install all of the components. You can. You don't necessarily have to. The components that I am installing on my machine are Apache, MySQL, FileZilla, PHP obviously, and PHP MyAdmin. These we need for this class. I will talk about sending email and show you how to do it. However, I will do that on a real server. This is the default destination folder, and here again I generally take the defaults. And you will see the XAMPP logo, and it will take a few minutes to configure. You don't have to start the control panel, but you may. I have a program icon for the control panel in my taskbar. You can configure the icon anywhere on your computer that you wish. When you launch the control panel, you will need to start the services that you want to use. And so for the beginning of this class, in order to learn PHP, you will need to launch the control panel and start the Apache server because PHP is running on the Apache server. There are some other configuration options available to you that you might need to use in the future. When you install the XAMPP environment, the program files are installed on the C drive in the XAMPP folder. In that folder, you will see an htdocs folder. That is your web root. That is where all your files go. And I suggest creating folders, maybe a folder for each class, in order to organize things. Notice that there is a default file already there, index.php. And the way that a web server works, when you access that folder or any folder, it will automatically launch the default file. Now, this index.php redirects us to the dashboard. So if you don't want to be redirected to the dashboard, if you just want a display of all your folders, you can rename that file. Or you can just remember what your folders are and type them in after localhost, which you will see in my demo shortly. These, just to refresh concepts here, these are common names for default files. Notice that an HTML extension, index, is also a default file, a very commonly used name for the home page, meaning if you type in the address, it automatically loads. However, index.php will probably take precedence over index.html. So when the server is directed to a folder, it will search for a default file, of which there are many. And depending on which one it finds and its order of precedence, it will load that. All right, so here's an example of the dashboard. So when you type in localhost in your URL text area in the browser in order to access the root of your web server, it will redirect to the dashboard. So you can just replace that folder name with a folder where your files will be located. However, there is a lot of good information on this dashboard, so you probably want to keep it here. There are some how-tos and some FAQs here that pertain not only to XAMPP, Apache, but also to MySQL. This is the previous version of XAMPP, just in case you happen to have installed it several years ago. So here again, your web pages, which should be organized in folders, should be placed inside htdocs in order for the PHP code to be executed. Remember, this is part of the Apache server that is running on your computer. Putting them anywhere else is not going to work. All right, so let's take an example. So supposing I have a folder called class, and in that folder I have an index.html and an index.php file. If I access that folder called class using localhost, it will launch the default file, which will be index.php. So I will see a web page, and that any PHP code in that will be processed. So here again, PHP takes precedence over HTML. Not to say that you might have both, or many. You might have many HTML files and many PHP files in a website. They all work together. Okay, so here again, when we look at the web page in a browser, we see the generated content. However, when you right-click and look at the view source, you do not see PHP. You will never see PHP in the browser because the server processes that PHP and sends it back to the browser as HTML. The browser only understands HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. The PHP code is for the server. The server processes that and sends it back as HTML, even though the web page in the browser has a PHP extension. Now, supposing you saved an HTML file with PHP code in it. That will not work. The browser looks at the extension .html and it just loads the file. It does not process it. The server needs to know that that is a PHP file, which is why any PHP code has to be placed in a file with a .php extension so that code will be processed on the server. It doesn't matter if there is PHP in a .html. The server is not going to look at it and not going to process it. Okay, you cannot just click on a PHP file. It will not work properly. It will either show you the code or the browser's not going to know what to do with it. Everything has to be accessed via localhost. In order to use PHP, the code needs to be executed or run on a server that supports PHP. The most popular server environment is the Apache server. You will need to download and install the XAMPP environment, which comes with Apache, MySQL, and some other services. I have launched the control panel, which is located in my taskbar, or you can create a shortcut on your desktop. And now I will start it. You need to do this every time you want to work with PHP. Now the PHP web server, well, it's not really the PHP web server, it's the Apache web server that is running PHP, has been activated. Here again, you would click to stop it when you're finished. So let me minimize this. And now let me open my file manager. And I'm on Windows. On the left-hand side, on the C drive, this is where the XAMPP environment is installed. And if you go to your hard drive and look at it, you will see the htdocs folder. This is where all of your code needs to go. This is the server root. It is no different than the root of the server where your web files get uploaded to on a commercial web server on the web. Notice it has a default file, index.php, which will be loaded. Now, this file directs you to the dashboard. So you have a choice. You can either rename this to disable it so that it will not load by default, or just remember where things are. Because you cannot just click on a file in this folder, because it is a server file, not a static HTML file. For example, here I have the Muroc files situated, and that is the folder that I will look at shortly. In my chapter 1, there is an index and a discount. It is processed with a PHP file. However, if I load the index, it will work. But look at my path. This is not a web server. This is a physical path. So if I try to put a price in here and a discount and calculate, notice it's showing me the PHP code. It did not process anything. Okay, so the point is you cannot just click on a PHP file or a page that is processed with a PHP file. You need to go to the local host. This is your default web server. And as I said, by default, automatically the index.php redirects you to the dashboard. So if I were to type in Muroc text, now, very conveniently, I have a listing of my folders. If I go into Book Apps, and now I go here, notice we're working from our local host. This is not a path to a file. This is configured on a web server. Now, if I put a price in here, and I calculate, there we go. And if you notice, look at my file name, because the action of this form has been processed by a PHP file, and there we are. Another way of accessing the web server is with the TCP/IP address, which is also commonly used. You may hear this referred to as the loopback address. It is 127.0.0.1, and that should take me, there you go, to my dashboard. So here again, I can use that. Also.